What's up, folks? Welcome back to Tactical Tortoise. My name is Trevi, and welcome back to another Tournament Tech Talk. This is the Warhammer 40k video series where I take a tournament from this past weekend's events and analyze the top placing lists. But today we're doing something a little bit different. Instead of talking about a single undefeated list, I'm going to be covering new Tyranid lists using the updated 9th Ed Codex that showed up in a big way at a GT this past weekend. That's right, folks. A GT allowed players to use the leaked, updated codex prior to its release, which is super cool. And as a Tyranid guy, it is my sacred and solemn duty to talk about them. As always, if you enjoy my 40k content and these video series, drop a like on the video, drop a subscribe on the channel, comment down below about how broken you think Tyranids are going to be once their codex releases, and let's get into this tech talk. The GT in question was the 41-player Bedlam in the Burgh, hosted at the Fabricators Forge venue in Cariopolis, Pennsylvania. Fabricators Forge is a staple in the US GT circuit and puts on a lot of awesome events, and has a very cool venue. The terrain for the event looked great, and it sounded like everyone had a good time over there. Speaking of terrain, the event also used standardized terrain layouts, similar to Games Workshop's own US Open layouts. This is a pretty big deal since I think the new Tyranid Codex is going to be relatively terrain dependent, especially since it looks to use the bodyguard mechanic as much as possible, with those Tyrant Guard blocking for Hive Tyrants in a central position on the table. Now, I'm going to do something a little bit different for this episode. Instead of picking one top player and reviewing all of their matchups for the event, what I'm going to be doing is going through the two Tyranid lists that were brought to the GT and analyzing those lists specifically. In addition, we are early in the Tyranid cycle, and while I think the Codex is obviously extremely strong, it's also hard to make any meta judgments about power level from this event in particular, since it comes before the April data slate, which promises to shake things up in a big way, and before any prospective changes to the Tyranid Codex upon its release. So let's get into it, and let's start by talking about our 4th place finisher at a 4-1 record, Matt Tarantine. Matt brought a double patrol detachment High Fleet Leviathan build. This brought 2 Foot Hive Tyrants, which I really appreciate. One, a hybrid Hive Tyrant, bringing a Lash Whip and Monstrous Bone Sword to give some pretty decent melee output, in addition to Shard Gullet, the Relic Heavy Venom Cannon that shoots for AP 4, just a casual 5 damage. In addition, we have a Neurothrope with Catalyst. Interestingly, no Onslaught on the Neurothrope in this list, but we do have Onslaught on that support Hive Tyrant. And to fill out our first patrol, a unit of 18 Hormigans with Toxin Sacks, 1 unit of Tyranid Warriors, a unit of Tyrant Guard, fascinatingly to me, with Crusher Claws. There's a little bit of a problem with Crushing Claws on the Tyrant Guard datasheet. They cost 20 points per model, which means the upgrade for Tyrant Guard to get these weapons is a whopping 60 points. You're halfway to a second unit of Tyrant Guard for the upgrade to get that additional damage from those Crushing Claws. This might be a little bit inefficient of a pick. We have a unit of Zoanthropes to give that once per game 4+ invulnerable save to all the monsters using their Synaptic Imperative, an Exocrine, 1 Screamer Killer just to use as a little bit of a nuclear missile, and moving on to the second patrol detachment, we have 2 units of 10 Gargoyles, a Maleceptor, a Haruspex upgraded with Dermic Symbiosis, as well as, last but certainly not least, the Swarmlord himself. I do think Swarmlord needs some very specific types of lists in order to be most effective, and this kind of Tyranid list is definitely one for him, especially since it includes that big unit of 18 Hormigans that Swarmlord can buff up with his full rerolls to hit, potentially double Obsec on those guys to allow them to run up very aggressively using Bounding Leap, advancing and charging into your opponent's backline and tying up all their stuff, doing some appreciable damage, especially with those full rerolls to hit, fishing for automatic wounds thanks to that Toxin Sack upgrade, and really just gumming up the works. The Gargoyles are also very nice in there alongside those Hormigans to be able to trade for objectives, and they give you some access to additional infantry units that are relatively fast to do secondaries like retrieve Knockwind data. Now, I think the biggest downside of this list, outside of those Hormigans, is the relative lack of reach. We don't have any Harpies, and we don't have any Flying Hive Tyrants, which means the threat ranges, again, outside of the Hormigans, are relatively low. That said, it does brawl in the middle pretty well, with that Haruspex and a Maleceptor Scepter to be able to fight over the middle objective. And as we move on and Tyranids develop further, I think one general trend that we're going to be seeing is that fighting Tyranids in a straight-up brawl over the center of the table is almost universally going to be a losing proposition. Since while Tyranids, outside of their aircraft and flying units, lack an extreme threat range and have lost a lot of their movement tricks, their close-range damage output, and especially the ability to deliver mortal wounds in the psychic phase with that Malice Scepter, is going to be unparalleled. Their direct fire shooting is also very good, so as soon as you expose yourself to their entire army, they can do some appreciable damage in the shooting phase as well. This is definitely the more off-the-wall list of the two that we're going to be talking about. I do like the inclusion of the light infantry, and the 2 foot hive tyrants are definitely interesting, especially since they supplement the pretty impressive shooting of the army, but obviously lacking that threat range I think is going to hamper it a little bit in the long run. And we do see that manifested in a round 3 loss for Matt, although he was able to manage 4 decisive wins in his other games. Round 1 against Grey Knights, 97-52. In round 2 against Adeptus Mechanicus, 97-73. Obviously with that loss in round 3, still a close game though, 82-90 in favor of Farsight Enclaves. Round 4, a win against Adeptus Sororitas, 95-49. And round 5, I think even more impressively, a win versus a Boar Concept Tau list, 98-86. Importantly, that was a triple Storm Surge Tau list, but the inclusion of bodyguards in those Tyrant guards in this updated Tyranid Codex are a super big deal in that matchup, and actually allow Tyranids to appreciably interact with those big Storm Surges and those super static gunline units without being vaporized off the table, since in some instances they can lack the threat range to Alpha Strike them. It should be noted that in general, this event was dominated by Tau and Harlequins, 2 out of the 3 podium players playing Tau Empire, and the top 10, including 3 Eldar armies, an additional Tau army, as well as 2 Adeptus Custodes alongside these Tyranids. This gives us a pretty good look at how this codex has improved the Tau matchup. And something that's similar to my own experience is that while Tau was, at best, a coin flip for Crusher Stampede builds using the 8th edition codex, depending on the Tau build, oftentimes you would hit lists like Triple Storm Surge or multiple broadside lists and basically just shake hands with your opponent and go home. The new Tyranid Codex, though, is making that matchup a lot closer, and one thing that we're going to be seeing are a lot of very close scores between this updated Tyranid Codex and the Tau Codex, which is nice to see. While it's obvious that this Tyranid Codex doesn't yet wholesale beat that Tau Codex, it does mean that the games are a lot closer, more competitive, and the players' individual play choices actually matter, unlike the previous matchup, which is a huge improvement. And speaking of that Tau matchup, let's move on to our next list. This is from Manik Gudimani, who came in 2nd place with a 4-0-1 record. That's right, we had a draw this time around, which is pretty intense. Manik was also playing High Fleet Leviathan and a double patrol confirmation. Unlike the last list, which is a little bit off the wall, this list is a list after my own heart. It is bringing double Winged Hive Tyrants, one with Reaper of Obliterax, one with Maw Claws of Thyrax. These are the 2 Hive Tyrant builds that I tend to run as well. We do have an Onslaught Catalyst Caddy Neurothrope, a unit of Tyranid Warriors filling out the first patrol alongside a Malice Scepter and a unit of Zoanthropes, with 2 Harpies, one of them with its Synaptic Enhancement, to give it that transhuman effect because of the Leviathan subfaction ability, the other one with Dermic Symbiosis to keep it in the air a little bit longer with that 4+ invulnerable save. Filling out the 2nd patrol detachment, we have that unit of Tyrant Guard to keep the Hive Tyrants alive in the center of the table. No upgrades on these guys, just their standard Scything Talons, so keeping them down at that low 40 points a model. A Tyranid Prime with Bone Swords and a Venom Cannon. Getting access to that exploding 6 imperative once per game is a pretty big deal, and the Tyranid Prime is just a pretty okay guy to have. Having an extra Tyranid Warrior that hits on 2s in the back line of your army means that occasionally you have something that can clear out Deep Strikers and random enemy chaff units, and having an untargetable Venom Cannon with a reroll to hit shooting your opponent every turn is kind of nice. This list is also bringing a Haruspex as well as a unit of Venom Thropes to give that -1 to hit effect to the whole army, which is good to protect a big unit of Tyranid Warriors. The whole unit upgraded with Toxin Sacks, including 8 standard Tyranid Warriors with a Death Spitter and Bone Swords, and 1 Venom Cannon. Now, it's interesting to see the Haruspex included in both of these lists, because it's a unit that I didn't rate too much on my first go-through of the list. Obviously, it does have a very flexible attack profile, being able to attack with its D3+3 damage claw attack, or being able to split its attack into 15 low-damage bite attacks to shovel infantry into its face. And while I don't know if it's a huge knockout success, it is very good at just fighting over the center of the table, especially if you include it in a Leviathan detachment attachment, get access to things like Synaptic Enhancement to give it permanent transhuman, although you do have Indomitable Monstrosity for 1 CP transhuman when it's targeted anyway, and you get Hive Nexus so you can permanently plant a 4+ invulnerable save on that guy using the Zoanthrope imperative. I think overall the Haruspex ends up just being a pain for your opponent to deal with and a unit that they have to focus their fire on because it does have a pretty good profile at killing basically anything your opponent puts in front of it. Alongside the Venom Thurboar for -1 to be hit and one of the several transhuman effects it has access to, it is pretty difficult to kill, especially alongside a 2+ armor save, which is a pretty big boon in the Tau-heavy metagame that this event was dominated by. Tau have a lot of AP1 pushing to AP2, maybe AP3 attacks that are going to be shooting at that guy, which means it's most likely going to be a 4+ or at worst on a 5+ save. Especially alongside those transhumans and penalties to hit, that makes this guy pretty annoying to take out. It'll be interesting to see whether or not the love for the Haruspex continues, or whether that Haruspex starts turning into a second Maliceptor, maybe an Exocrine, or just some more infantry for a little bit more chaff, or just some additional infantry to allow a greater volume of units on the table for the Tyranid army. I have no idea. Now, Manik was able to beat some pretty hefty meta contenders on their way to their 4-win record. We saw them beat an interesting Ulthway list in round 1 that was focused on Shadow Specters and Windrunners. There was a 100-40 win, a similar result to their round 2 win against Chaos Space Marines, which was 100-39. Round 3, we also saw a maxed score 100-57 against Adeptus Sororitas. This game was actually streamed on the Fabricators Forge YouTube channel, so you can go check it out over there. It was on a 5-objective mission, and I think those are going to be the wheelhouse for Tyranids going on into the future. As, like I said before, the Tyranid army is absolutely excellent at fighting over a center objective, meaning any situation where they can forsake their engage all friends for a secondary like Stranglehold and be able to force their opponent to come into them to fight them is going to be a big boon for any Tyranid player. Round 4 was where that tie came in, an 80-80 draw to Farside Enclaves, the same Farside Enclaves list that beat Matt Tarantine's army in round 3 of the event. And in my opinion, most impressively, a round 5 win against a Tau Sept triple broadside Tau army, 70-66. A ridiculously close score to close out the day. And that's the one that I'm really excited about. Armies from the previous version of Tyranids suffered so heavily against big, hefty gun lines, especially like triple broadside, that this new codex giving them a game plan into an army like that and allowing them to eke out these very close victories is a very big deal. Now, obviously, it's not a sure thing, as we saw these Tau lists not only beat Matt Tarantine's Tyranid army, but also tie and get a very close loss versus Manik Gudimani's Tyranid army, so I don't think that that matchup is going to be a slam dunk, but it is nice to see that this new Tyranid Codex is breathing some new life into these matchups that the previous version of Tyranids struggled with. But overall, these are the only 2 lists that were played in the Bedlam in the Burgh tournament, and putting their pilots to a 4-1 and 4-0-1 record, 2nd place and 4th place, is a pretty good showing for the Codex. If it came out of the gate swinging and just destroyed everything in front of it, I think that we would have a problem, but the fact that it looks like all of their games were close and they had some... But the fact that it looks like a lot of their games were very close means that I have high hopes for the faction not being quite the same level of degenerate that we've seen some other releases come out with in 9th edition. But that's all I have to say about Tyranids today. Thanks for watching the video. Let me know down in the comments what you think about these Tyranid lists. Like I said, I think Manik's list is very similar to what I'm probably going to be running once I start playing this codex competitively. Very excited to see Tyranids come out of the gate with some pretty high scores, and excited to see where the faction develops from here. Thanks again for watching all the way to the end of the video. Big thanks to everyone who supports the channel, especially over on Patreon. Patreon.com/TacticalTortoise. Also, YouTube channel members, Twitch subscribers. All those people are phenomenal, and I love you. Remember to keep it classy, folks, and have happy wargaming.